I started with your car. You're next.
The sound of my wife's laughter cut through the thin motel wall like a blade through paper. Not the gentle laugh I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago, but something raw and breathless that made my stomach clench. I pressed my ear against the cheap wood paneling, my wedding ring catching the neon light from the vacancy sign outside. "God, you're incredible," came her voice, muffled but unmistakable. "My husband could never make me feel like this." My hand froze on the door handle. The key card I'd gotten from the desk clerk felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my pocket. Everything I thought I knew about my life was about to shatter, and I wasn't ready for the explosion. But I also wasn't ready to walk away. I stepped back from room 237 and pulled out my phone. The smart thing would be to burst in right now, catch them in the act, let rage take over like any normal husband would do. Instead, I opened my camera app and took a picture of the door number, the timestamp reading 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when Jessica had told me she was working late at the boutique. The methodical part of my brain, the part that had made me good at my job as a building inspector for the past 12 years, kicked into gear. You don't tear down a structure without understanding its weak points first. You don't demolish anything without a plan. I walked back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat, hands steady on the wheel despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Through the windshield, I could see Jessica's silver Honda parked 3 spaces down from a black BMW with dealer plates. Real estate agent, I'd bet money on it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Working late again tonight, babe. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Love you too. Be safe." The first lie I'd ever told my wife, but it wouldn't be the last. 6 months earlier. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, written in a language I'd been too trusting to read. Jessica had always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. But lately she'd been different. More attention to her appearance, new clothes that seemed too expensive for a boutique clerk's salary, and a sudden interest in working out that had nothing to do with health. "I'm thinking about getting into real estate," she'd mentioned one morning over coffee, not looking up from her phone. "There's good money in it, and I'm tired of folding clothes all day." "That's great," I'd said, meaning it. "You'd be good at sales." She'd smiled then, the kind of smile that used to make my day, but somehow felt different. Practiced. "Thanks, baby. I knew you'd support me." The real estate thing explained the new contacts in her phone, the late-night networking events, and the sudden influx of business cards scattered around her purse. What it didn't explain was why she'd started washing her hair every single day when she used to go 3 days between washes, or why she'd bought expensive lingerie that I'd never seen her wear. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer 3 weeks ago when her friend Michelle called the house looking for her. "Hey, Danny," Michelle had said, her voice carrying that tone women use when they're about to drop a bomb. "Is Jess around?" I tried her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. "She's at work," I'd replied, glancing at the clock. 7 p.m. on a Thursday. "Work? But the boutique closes at 6 on weekdays. I drove by there an hour ago, and the lights were off." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Michelle cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Oh," she'd said. "Oh, I see. Well, just tell her I called, okay?" But she hadn't hung up. Instead, I heard her take a deep breath like she was making a decision. "Danny, we need to talk, not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow for coffee?" That's how I'd ended up at Starbucks the next morning, listening to Michelle's careful words about Jessica's new friends in real estate and the mysterious phone calls she'd been making during their girls' nights out. "I don't want to cause trouble," Michelle had said, stirring her latte nervously. "But she's my friend, and so are you. And friends don't let friends get played like fools." She'd slid a folded piece of paper across the table. On it was an address and a time. Sunset Motel, room 237, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3:30 p.m. "I followed her last Tuesday," Michelle had admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, Danny." "I'm so sorry." Back to the present. Now, I sat in my truck outside that same motel, the paper with Michelle's handwriting crumpled in my glove compartment, watching the BMW's owner emerge from room 237. He was everything I wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His hair was perfectly styled, his teeth were blindingly white, and he walked with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if you were good enough. He checked his phone, smoothed down his tie, and climbed into the BMW like he owned the world. The license plate read, "Sold One," in custom letters. Cute. Jessica came out 5 minutes later, her hair disheveled despite her attempts to smooth it down. She looked around the parking lot nervously before hurrying to her Honda, checking her reflection in the side mirror and reapplying lipstick with shaking hands. I waited until both cars had left before starting my engine. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. Going to grab dinner with Michelle, home by 9. Another lie. Michelle was out of town visiting her sister in Phoenix. I knew because she'd told me yesterday when she'd called to check if I was okay. The drive home took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to decide how I was going to handle this. The old Danny would have confronted Jessica the moment she walked through the door, probably would have yelled and thrown things and made a scene that accomplished nothing except giving her ammunition to use against me later. But the old Danny was dying in that motel parking lot, replaced by someone harder. Someone who understood that revenge wasn't a dish best served hot. It was best served calculated, precise, and devastating. I pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 3 years ago. It was a nice house in a good neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their own business, except for Mrs. Patterson next door, who noticed everything and remembered it all. Inside, I opened my laptop and started a new document. At the top, I typed, Foundation Report, Marriage of Daniel and Jessica Thompson. Then I began to document everything I could remember about the past few months. Every lie, every excuse, every time she'd come home smelling different or acting strange. When Jessica finally came home at 9:15, I was sitting on the couch watching television like nothing had changed. How was dinner with Michelle? I asked, not looking away from the screen. Oh, you know how she is, Jessica said, dropping her purse by the door. Can't stop talking about her job. I'm exhausted. She kissed my cheek, and I caught a whiff of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Expensive stuff. The kind of cologne a successful real estate agent might wear. I'm going to take a shower, she said. Long day. I nodded and went back to watching TV, but my mind was already working on the problem like I was inspecting a building for structural damage. You start with the foundation and work your way up, checking every joint, every connection, every place where stress might cause a failure. Jessica's affair was built on lies, secrets, and the assumption that I was too trusting or too stupid to figure it out. Those were weak points. All I had to do was apply pressure in the right places and watch the whole thing collapse. The shower ran for 20 minutes. When Jessica came out, her phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Probably Michelle, she said, grabbing it quickly. She always thinks of things to tell me after we hang out. But I'd seen the name on the screen before she could hide it. Brad K. Brad. So that was the BMW driver's name. Jessica stepped into the bathroom to check her skincare routine, and I heard her whispering into the phone. The words were muffled, but the tone was intimate, affectionate, the tone she used to use with me. When she came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. She settled in beside me, but I could feel her restlessness, the way she kept checking her phone under the covers. Around midnight, she finally drifted off, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning my next move. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work. Not something I'd done in years, but I needed time to do research. The first step was finding out everything I could about Brad K. A quick search of real estate agents in the city turned up dozens of results. But only one Brad with a last name starting with K, who drove a BMW and looked like he could be Jessica's type. Bradley Kingston, top seller at Premium Properties, winner of multiple sales awards, and, according to his bio, single and ready to help you find your dream home. His photo showed the same perfect teeth and cocky smile I'd seen in the motel parking lot. His bio mentioned that he specialized in exclusive listings and personalized service for discerning clients. I bet he did. I spent the morning building a complete profile. Bradley Kingston, 34 years old, lived in a downtown condo worth more than my house, drove the BMW and a motorcycle, and based on his social media posts, had a taste for expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and married women who were looking for excitement. The social media was a goldmine. Brad wasn't smart enough to keep his personal life private. His Instagram was full of photos from expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and vacation spots that screamed, "Look how successful I am." What was more interesting were the comments from various women, including a few whose profile pictures showed wedding rings. But the real breakthrough came when I found his business website. Under recent sales, there was a photo of Brad shaking hands with a satisfied customer in front of a sold sign. The customer looked familiar, and it took me a minute to place him. Dr. Michael Garrett, whose wife Patricia had hired Jessica to help redecorate their living room 6 months ago. That's when I realized Jessica's affair wasn't just about Brad. It was about the whole lifestyle he represented, the money, the luxury, the feeling of being special and desired by someone who could afford to take her places I never could. I cross-referenced Brad's sales with Jessica's work schedule and found the pattern. Every time Brad had a major sale, Jessica had worked late or gone out with friends that same week. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Michelle's name appeared on the screen. "How are you holding up?" she asked without preamble. "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I need to ask you something. Has Jessica ever mentioned anyone named Brad Kingston?" There was a long pause. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about her new real estate friends." Another pause. "Danny, there's something else I didn't tell you yesterday. About Jessica's new lifestyle." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean? The expensive clothes, the jewelry, the sudden interest in high-end restaurants? Where do you think she's getting the money for all that? Her job at the boutique pays $12 an hour. I'd wondered about that myself, but hadn't wanted to face the implications. Now the pieces were falling into place like blocks in a controlled demolition. "There's more," Michelle continued. "Last month at Jenny's birthday party, Jessica got a call and stepped outside to take it. When she came back, she was all flustered and happy, talking about how someone had just surprised her with dinner reservations at Le Bernardin. You know, that French place downtown where dinner costs $300 per person." I knew the place. I'd looked at their menu once and laughed at the prices. She said it was a client from the boutique who wanted to thank her for helping pick out his wife's anniversary gift. But Danny, that story never made sense. What kind of client takes a retail clerk to a restaurant like that? What kind indeed? The kind who was sleeping with her and had money to burn. After Michelle hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the evidence I'd compiled. Photos, timelines, social media posts, financial inconsistencies. If this were a building inspection, I'd have enough documentation to condemn the structure. But I wasn't ready to tear it down yet. First, I needed to understand the full extent of the damage. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. Wednesday morning, I got a call about an inspection at a new development on the north side of town. Premium Properties was handling the sales, which meant there was a good chance I'd run into Brad Kingston. I dressed carefully that morning. Clean work clothes, clipboard, official-looking hard hat. The costume of a man who was invisible to people like Brad, someone he'd dismiss as unimportant the moment he saw me. The development was exactly what I'd expected. Cookie-cutter luxury homes with granite countertops and 3-car garages, priced for people who wanted to feel successful without having to think too hard about it. The kind of place Jessica probably dreamed about living. I was checking the electrical work in the model home when I heard voices in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see Brad Kingston showing the house to a young couple, his sales pitch smooth as silk. "The thing about luxury," he was saying, "is that it's not just about what you own. It's about how it makes you feel. When you come home to a place like this, you know you've made it." The couple nodded eagerly, already sold on the fantasy he was peddling. Brad caught sight of me through the doorway and gave a dismissive nod before turning his attention back to his clients. "Don't mind the inspector," he said with a chuckle. "Just part of the process. Nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. If only he knew. I finished my inspection and was loading my equipment into the truck when Brad approached me, probably to make sure I wasn't going to find any problems that might end his sale. "Everything look good?" he asked, that practiced smile never wavering. "Solid foundation," I replied, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Built to last." He nodded and started to turn away, but I wasn't done. "Nice car," I said, gesturing toward the BMW. "Sold, one clever plate." His chest puffed up with pride. "Thanks, bought it after my record-breaking quarter last year. Sometimes you've got to reward yourself for hard work, you know." "I imagine the ladies love it," I said casually. His grin widened. "Can't complain. Success is attractive. Your girlfriend must be impressed." "No girlfriend," he said, and I caught something predatory in his expression. "I prefer to keep my options open. More fun that way." I nodded like we were just two guys talking, but inside I was cataloging every word, every expression, every tell. This man had no conscience, no sense of boundaries. To him, Jessica wasn't a person with feelings and a marriage worth respecting. She was just another conquest, another validation of his success. Well, I said, closing the tailgate of my truck, I better get back to work. Got a lot of foundations to check. Yeah, good luck with that, he said, already losing interest and checking his phone. As I drove away, I caught him in my rearview mirror, probably texting Jessica about their next meeting. The casual cruelty of it, discussing their affair within 50 feet of her husband, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. Brad Kingston thought he was untouchable because he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. He was about to learn that every foundation, no matter how solid it seems, has a breaking point. That evening, Jessica came home from work with a new purse. Designer leather, probably worth more than I made in a week. Where'd that come from? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Oh, this old thing. She laughed, but there was something forced about it. It was a return at the store. Manager let me have it for cost. Another lie, but I just nodded and went back to reading my newspaper. Let her think she was getting away with it. Every lie she told me was another piece of evidence, another weak point in her foundation. My phone had been quiet all day, but around 9 p.m. it started buzzing with activity, text after text from an unknown number. Does your husband know? How long has this been going on? Someone saw you at the motel. He's going to find out. I watched Jessica's face as she read the messages, saw the color drain from her cheeks, watched her hands start to shake. She excused herself to the bathroom, and I heard her making a frantic phone call, her voice high and panicked. When she came back, she was trying to act normal, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Everything okay? I asked. Just someone playing a prank, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. You know how people are these days. I nodded sympathetically and put my arm around her. Don't let it get to you. Probably just some kid with too much time on their hands. She leaned into me, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the sound of her laughter through that motel room wall, the way she'd told Brad that her husband could never make her feel the way he did. The anonymous texts had been my idea, sent from a burner phone I'd bought with cash, just enough to rattle her, to make her wonder who knew and how much they'd seen. Fear would make her sloppy, and sloppy people made mistakes. Over the next few days, I watched Jessica spiral. She jumped every time her phone rang, checked over her shoulder when we were out in public, and started coming home earlier from her work events. The confidence that had made her so attractive to Brad was cracking, replaced by paranoia and doubt. Meanwhile, I kept building my case. I'd set up a small camera in my truck and started following Jessica on her supposed work nights. The footage I collected was better than any private investigator could have provided. Clear shots of her entering the motel, Brad arriving minutes later, both of them leaving separately with guilty expressions. But the real breakthrough came when I decided to dig deeper into Brad's business practices. A public record search revealed something interesting. He'd been involved in several property deals with married clients where the husband had later filed for divorce. It was a pattern. Brad would seduce the wife, convince her that her husband was holding her back from the lifestyle she deserved, and then help her hide assets during the divorce proceedings in exchange for a cut of the settlement. Jessica wasn't just having an affair, she was being groomed for something much bigger. The confirmation came in the form of financial records. Our joint checking account showed several large transfers to a savings account I'd never heard of, an account that Jessica had opened without telling me. When I traced the account, I found it was at a bank that Brad Kingston had recommended in several online reviews. Jessica was preparing to leave me, and she was stealing money to do it. That night, I made my first real move. Honey, I said over dinner, I got a call from the bank today. They flagged some unusual activity on our account and temporarily froze it as a fraud precaution. Jessica's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Froze it? For how long? Could be a few weeks while they investigate. Something about large transfers that didn't match our normal spending pattern. She set down her fork, no longer interested in eating. That's ridiculous. Can't you call them and straighten it out? I tried, but they said it's automated. Once the fraud alert gets triggered, they have to follow protocol. It wasn't true, of course. I'd called the bank myself and put a temporary hold on large withdrawals, citing security concerns. Jessica's secret account would run dry quickly without our joint funds to replenish it. This is so inconvenient, she muttered, already calculating how much cash she had available. We'll manage, I said. It's not like we're living paycheck to paycheck. But Jessica was living paycheck to paycheck because she'd been funneling our money into her escape fund for months. Without access to our joint account, she'd have to rely on her boutique salary and whatever Brad was willing to contribute to their relationship. I gave it 3 days. On day 4, Jessica's phone rang during dinner. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. "I have to take this," she said, stepping outside onto the patio. Through the window, I could see her pacing back and forth, one hand pressed to her ear, the other gesturing frantically. The conversation went on for 20 minutes, and when she came back inside, she looked like she'd been crying. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Fine," she snapped, then caught herself. "Sorry, just stressed about work." But it wasn't work stress. It was the stress of realizing that her lifestyle upgrade was about to come to a screeching halt. Brad Kingston was used to women who could contribute to the financial side of their arrangement. A woman who suddenly couldn't afford expensive dinners and designer clothes wasn't nearly as attractive. That weekend, Jessica volunteered to work extra shifts at the boutique. Translation: she was desperate for cash and probably hoping Brad would take pity on her and foot the bill for their usual expensive dates. Instead of going to the boutique, she went to the motel. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual 2-hour rendezvous, she was back in her car within 30 minutes, and she wasn't alone. Through my telephoto lens, I watched Brad Kingston follow her out of the motel room, his expression cold and dismissive. They stood beside her car, having what looked like an increasingly heated argument. Jessica was gesturing pleadingly, while Brad kept checking his watch and looking around the parking lot like he was embarrassed to be seen with her. Finally, he said something that made Jessica step back like she'd been slapped. Then he walked to his BMW and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot. Jessica sat in her car for almost an hour before driving home. When she came through the front door, her eyes were red and puffy, and she headed straight for the wine cabinet. "Rough day at work?" I asked. She poured herself a large glass of Merlot and drank half of it in one gulp. "You could say that." The cracks were spreading. Jessica was discovering that her lover's affection had a price tag, and she could no longer afford to pay it. But I wasn't ready for the structure to collapse yet. I needed to make sure everyone saw exactly what she'd built her new life on. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Michelle called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice tight with excitement and disgust. "Danny, you need to hear this. I was at coffee yesterday with some girls from book club, and you'll never guess what came up." I waited, knowing from her tone that this was going to be big. Patricia Garrett was there, Dr. Garrett's wife, the one Jessica helped redecorate, I remembered. The connection to Brad's real estate sales. Well, Patricia was complaining about marriage problems, how her husband has been acting strange lately, working late, being secretive with his phone, and then she mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. Michelle paused for dramatic effect. She said she found a receipt in his car for dinner at Le Bernardin, for 2 people, on a night when she was out of town visiting her mother. The same restaurant where Jessica had supposedly been taken by a grateful boutique customer. The timing clicked into place with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "There's more," Michelle continued. "Patricia hired a private investigator, and guess who her husband has been seen with? Let me guess. Your wife, multiple times at different hotels around the city. Danny, she's not just cheating with Brad Kingston, she's got a whole other thing going with Dr. Garrett?" I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the phone pressed to my ear, trying to process this information. Jessica wasn't just having an affair, she was running a full-scale operation, juggling multiple wealthy men like she was collecting trading cards. "How long has Michelle known?" I asked. "Patricia, she just found out. The PI only gave her the report yesterday. She's devastated, talking about divorce, the whole thing." This changed everything. Jessica's foundation wasn't just cracked, it was built on quicksand. She was playing a dangerous game with people who had resources and connections, and she was about to find out what happened when you crossed the wrong person. Dr. Michael Garrett wasn't some cocky real estate agent with more ego than brains. He was a successful surgeon with a reputation to protect, and a wife who had her own money and social connections. If Patricia Garrett decided to make Jessica's life difficult, she had the power to do it. I thanked Michelle and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. Jessica had gotten greedy, probably figured that 1 wealthy lover was good, but 2 was better. She'd underestimated how small the wealthy social circle really was, how quickly word would spread once the wives started comparing notes. The question was, did Brad Kingston know about Dr. Garrett? And if not, how would he react when he found out he was sharing his conquest? I decided to find out. That afternoon, I drove to Premium Properties. The office was exactly what I'd expected. All glass and chrome, with motivational posters about success and achievement covering the walls. Brad Kingston's desk was positioned prominently near the window, where everyone could see his sales awards and expensive suits. He looked up when I walked in, and I could see him trying to place my face. "Danny Thompson," I said, extending my hand. "We met at the Riverside Development inspection." "Right, the building inspector." He shook my hand with the kind of grip that was trying to prove something. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm here about my wife, Jessica Thompson. She's been talking about getting into real estate, and your name came up as someone who might be able to give her some guidance." I watched his face carefully, looking for any tell, any sign of recognition or guilt. There was a flicker of something, surprise, panic, but he covered it quickly. "Jessica Thompson," he repeated slowly. "The name doesn't ring a bell, but I meet a lot of people. What kind of guidance is she looking for?" "Oh, you know Jessica," I said casually. "Blonde, works at the boutique downtown, drives a silver Honda. She mentioned meeting you through some mutual friends in the real estate crowd, said you'd been very helpful showing her the ropes." Now I had his attention. His salesman's smile flickered, and I could see him calculating how much I might know and how much danger he might be in. "I'm not sure She particularly mentioned how generous you've been with your time," I continued, still smiling. "Taking her to nice restaurants? Helping her network with potential clients?" She was very appreciative. Brad's face had gone pale under his salon tan. "Look, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think so." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "See, Jessica tells me everything, and I mean everything, including some very interesting stories about your teaching methods." He stared at me for a long moment, trying to figure out if I was a husband who'd discovered his wife's affair or something else entirely. I could see him running through possibilities, calculating risks. "What exactly do you want?" he asked finally. "Information," I said. "You see, Jessica's been taking lessons from more than one teacher. Dr. Michael Garrett, for instance. You know Dr. Garrett, right? Patricia Garrett's husband?" The recognition hit Brad like a physical blow. His mouth fell open and his hands clenched into fists on his desk. "That's impossible," he said. "Jessica wouldn't. She's not that kind of—" "She's exactly that kind," I interrupted. "And from what I hear, Mrs. Garrett is not taking the news well. In fact, she's hired some very expensive lawyers and some very thorough investigators. The kind who dig up everything about everyone involved in these kinds of situations." Brad was sweating now, his confidence completely evaporated. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said, standing up. "I just thought you should know what you're dealing with. Jessica isn't the innocent boutique clerk you thought she was. She's a professional, and you're not her only client." I headed for the door, then turned back like I just remembered something. "Oh, and Brad, Mrs. Garrett has photos, lots of them. Might want to think about how that affects your business reputation." I left him sitting there, staring at his awards, and probably wondering how quickly his career could implode. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. The fallout started within 24 hours. Jessica came home from work the next evening, looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her hands were shaking, and she went straight for the wine without even acknowledging me. "Rough day?" I asked, settling into my recliner with the newspaper. "You could say that," she muttered, pouring herself a generous glass of Chardonnay. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since she'd walked through the door, but she kept ignoring it. Finally, when the buzzing became too insistent to ignore, she answered with a sharp, "What?" The voice on the other end was loud enough that I could hear it from across the room, though I couldn't make out the words. But Jessica's responses told the story clearly enough. "I don't know how she found out. No, I never told her anything about you. That's not my fault. You knew the risks." She ended the call and immediately poured herself another glass of wine. Before she could take a sip, the phone rang again. Different ringtone this time. "Hello," she answered, her voice smaller now, more frightened. This conversation was quieter, but I caught enough to understand what was happening. Someone was very angry. Someone with the power to make Jessica's life extremely uncomfortable. When she hung up, Jessica sank onto the couch and put her head in her hands. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, looking up from my paper with false concern. Fine, she said without lifting her head. Just work stuff. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If someone's giving you trouble at work, I can... It's not work, she snapped, then caught herself. I mean, it is work, but it's complicated. Politics, you know? I nodded sympathetically. Office drama. That's the worst. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. There was something calculating in her eyes, as if she was weighing whether I might be useful to her somehow. Danny, she said slowly, what would you do if someone threatened you? Professionally, I mean. Threaten me how? Like, if someone said they were going to ruin your reputation, cost you your job, that kind of thing? I pretended to consider this carefully. Well, I'd probably try to figure out why they wanted to hurt me, and then I'd make sure they had more to lose than I did. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her reconsidering everything she thought she knew about her mild-mannered husband. Have you ever had to do that? She asked. Once or twice, I said, keeping my tone casual. People underestimate building inspectors. They think we're just paper pushers who don't matter. But we see everything, we document everything, and we have a lot more power than people realize. Jessica's phone buzzed again. This time she looked at the screen and turned it face down without answering. The thing about threats, I continued, is that they only work if the person making them has something you want or need. But if you can take away what they have instead... I shrugged and went back to my newspaper, letting her imagination fill in the blanks. That night, Jessica tossed and turned beside me, getting up every few minutes to check her phone. Around 3 a.m., I heard her in the bathroom talking in urgent whispers to someone. The conversation went on for almost an hour. When she finally came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep, but I could feel her staring at me in the darkness. She was starting to wonder just how much I knew and what I might be capable of. The foundation was cracking, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. Friday afternoon, I made another visit to the motel, not to catch Jessica in the act this time, but to have a conversation with the desk clerk who'd been so helpful in providing me with room information. Tommy was his name, a college kid who worked the evening shift to pay for school. He was the type who noticed things, but minded his own business, unless someone made it worth his while to do otherwise. Hey, Mr. Thompson, he said when I walked up to the counter. How's the investigation business treating you? I'd let him assume I was a private investigator rather than correct his assumption. It made our transactions smoother. Can't complain, I said, sliding a $100 bill across the counter. I need another favor. His eyes lit up. This was more than he made in a day at his legitimate job. What kind of favor? Next Tuesday, there's going to be some drama in your parking lot, probably room 237, maybe the area around it. I need you to call in a noise complaint to the police right around 4 p.m. Tommy looked nervous. I don't want to get in trouble. I slid another 50 across the counter. You won't be in trouble. You'll be doing your civic duty, reporting a disturbance. The kind of thing a responsible employee would do. He pocketed the money quickly. What kind of disturbance are we talking about? The loud kind. Probably some arguing, maybe some pushing and shoving. Nothing too serious, but enough that you'd feel obligated to call it in. Tommy nodded. 4 p.m. on Tuesday, got it. And Tommy, make sure you mention that there might be some property damage. You know, the kind of thing that would require multiple officers to respond. I left the motel and drove to my next stop, a small electronics store downtown where I purchased a cheap voice recorder and several prepaid phones. The final pieces of my plan were falling into place. That evening, I sent carefully crafted text messages from different phones to both Brad and Dr. Garrett. To Brad, Jessica wants to meet you Tuesday at 4 p.m. Sunset Motel parking lot. She says it's urgent and she has something important to tell you about the Garrett situation. To Dr. Garrett, your wife hired a PI. Jessica Thompson is going to meet with him Tuesday at 4 p.m. to give him more information about your affair. Sunset Motel parking lot. Thought you should know. A friend. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Both men would show up expecting to confront Jessica about different things, neither knowing the other would be there. Jessica, meanwhile, thought she was meeting Brad privately to try to salvage their relationship. I'd created a perfect storm, and all I had to do was watch it tear apart everything Jessica had built. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Michelle called while Jessica was in the shower, her voice barely containing her excitement. Danny, you're not going to believe this. Patricia Garrett called me last night. She wants to meet with Jessica. Meet with her? Why? She wants to confront her face to face. Patricia is not the type to just file for divorce quietly. She wants Jessica to know exactly what she's cost her. And here's the thing. She wants witnesses. This was better than I could have hoped for. What kind of witnesses? The kind that make sure everyone in their social circle knows exactly what happened. Patricia's planning to invite several of the wives from their country club, including some who've had their own suspicions about their husbands and Jessica. I could hear Jessica turning off the shower. When is this happening? Tomorrow afternoon. Patricia's calling it a community intervention. She's rented a private room at the country club and sent formal invitations. Very official, very public. Has Jessica been invited? Oh, yes. Patricia made sure to have it hand-delivered to the boutique this morning. Jessica probably doesn't even know what hit her yet. After Michelle hung up, I sat in my kitchen grinning. Patricia Garrett was doing half my work for me, creating a public spectacle that would destroy Jessica's reputation in their social circle. The only thing better would be if the confrontation happened right after Jessica's world imploded at the motel. Jessica came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her phone already buzzing with what I assumed were panicked messages from Brad and Dr. Garrett. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" she said cautiously. I couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but I watched Jessica's face go through a range of emotions: confusion, fear, anger, and finally something that looked like determination. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll be there, but this is ridiculous and you know it." She hung up and threw the phone onto the bed with more force than necessary. "Problem?" I asked. "Some people have too much time on their hands," she said, pulling clothes from the closet with sharp, angry movements. "Too much money and too much time, so they make up drama to keep themselves entertained." Sounds stressful. It is, and unfair. People jump to conclusions, spread rumors, assume the worst about everything. I nodded sympathetically while mentally cataloging every word. Jessica was preparing her defense, practicing her victim narrative. By the time she faced Patricia Garrett and her circle of wealthy wives, she'd have convinced herself that she was the wronged party. "When is this meeting?" I asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. Some ridiculous intervention nonsense, like I'm some kind of criminal." "Want me to come with you? For moral support?" She looked at me sharply, and I could see her trying to figure out if my offer was genuine or if I knew more than I was letting on. "No," she said finally. "This is something I need to handle myself." "Of course, you're good at handling difficult situations." Another sharp look, but she didn't respond. Instead, she finished getting dressed and left for work without her usual goodbye kiss. That afternoon, I drove by the boutique and saw Jessica through the window, pacing behind the counter with her phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her body language, the way she kept running her free hand through her hair. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing, and she was finally starting to understand that she'd made enemies of people who could destroy her. Tuesday morning, Jessica barely spoke to me over breakfast. She pushed her eggs around her plate without eating, checked her phone constantly, and jumped every time a car door slammed in the neighborhood. "Big day at work?" I asked. "Something like that," she muttered. I kissed her cheek before leaving for my own job, a routine inspection that would give me a perfect alibi for the afternoon's events. "Good luck with whatever you're dealing with." She looked at me with that same calculating expression I'd been seeing more often lately. "Thanks." At 2 p.m., I wrapped up my inspection and drove to a parking garage across from the Sunset Motel. From the third floor, I had a perfect view of the motel parking lot and room 237. I'd brought a telephoto lens and a digital recorder, everything I needed to document the final act of Jessica's destruction. Jessica arrived first, at 3:45, parking her Honda in the same spot she'd used for months. She sat in her car for several minutes, checking her makeup in the mirror and practicing what looked like speeches or explanations. At 3:58, Brad Kingston's BMW pulled into the parking lot. He parked several spaces away from Jessica and sat in his car, clearly reluctant to approach her. I could see him checking his watch and looking around nervously. At 4:02, Dr. Garrett arrived in a black Mercedes. He parked near the motel office and immediately got out, his body language aggressive and purposeful. This was it. The moment when Jessica's carefully separated worlds collided. Jessica got out of her Honda and started walking toward Brad's BMW, but she stopped when she saw Dr. Garrett approaching from the other direction. The confusion on her face was visible even from my distance. Brad noticed Dr. Garrett at the same time and climbed out of his BMW. his usual confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. The three of them stood in a triangle in the parking lot, each trying to figure out why the others were there. Jessica said something to Brad, who gestured toward Dr. Garrett. Dr. Garrett said something sharp to Jessica, who stepped back with her hands raised defensively. Then Brad and Dr. Garrett noticed each other, really noticed each other, and the pieces clicked into place. The argument that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Brad, realizing he'd been played, started yelling at Jessica about lying and deception. Dr. Garrett, understanding that he wasn't Jessica's only wealthy lover, began shouting about being made a fool of. Jessica tried to explain, to calm them down, but she was caught between two angry men who discovered they were sharing her attention. Her confident facade cracked completely, and she started crying, which only made both men angrier. The argument escalated when Brad accused Dr. Garrett of stealing his girlfriend, and Dr. Garrett laughed in his face, saying he'd been seeing Jessica longer and had spent more money on her. That's when the pushing started. Dr. Garrett shoved Brad, who stumbled backward into his BMW. Brad recovered and charged at Dr. Garrett, and they ended up wrestling in the parking lot while Jessica screamed at them to stop. The fight was brief, but vicious. Brad was younger and stronger, but Dr. Garrett fought with the desperate fury of a man who was losing everything. They rolled across the asphalt, throwing punches and grappling for advantage. Jessica tried to separate them and caught an elbow to the face. She stumbled backward, landing hard on the concrete, her hand instinctively going to her face as the others froze in shock. That's when I heard the sirens. Right on schedule, Tommy had called in the disturbance, and the police were responding with multiple units. I watched from my perch as 3 squad cars pulled into the motel parking lot, their lights flashing and sirens wailing. The officers separated Brad and Dr. Garrett, both of whom were disheveled and clearly roughed up. Jessica sat on the curb holding a tissue to her nose, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she tried to explain to an officer why she was there. More cars arrived, not police this time, but expensive sedans and SUVs that I recognized from the country club parking lot. Patricia Garrett had apparently moved up her intervention timeline and brought her witnesses to see the show firsthand. I watched through my telephoto lens as a group of impeccably dressed women emerged from their vehicles and approached the scene. Patricia Garrett was easy to spot, tall, elegant, and radiating the kind of cold fury that only comes from having unlimited resources and a burning desire for revenge. The police were trying to maintain order, but the situation was spiraling beyond their control. Brad and Dr. Garrett were both trying to explain their side of the story. Jessica was sobbing and insisting this was all a misunderstanding, and Patricia Garrett was demanding that everyone present witness exactly what kind of woman had destroyed her marriage. I started my truck and drove down to street level, parking where I could see the action up close. The confrontation had moved beyond anything I'd planned, and I wanted to capture every moment of Jessica's complete downfall. By the time I positioned myself for a clear view, the scene had devolved into complete chaos. Patricia Garrett had apparently decided that a private intervention wasn't enough. She wanted a public execution. "This is the woman," she announced to anyone within hearing distance, pointing at Jessica with the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of commanding attention. "This is the woman who destroyed my marriage, seduced my husband, and stole money that belonged to my family." Jessica tried to protest, but her voice was lost in the general commotion. The police were trying to sort out what had happened, interviewing Brad and Dr. Garrett separately while keeping them apart. "She's not the only one," Patricia continued, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "How many other marriages has she targeted? How many other families has she destroyed for designer handbags and expensive dinners?" A small crowd had gathered. Motel guests, curious passersby, and the group of country club wives who were documenting everything with their phones. Jessica's humiliation was being broadcast in real time to everyone who mattered in her social circle. "This is crazy!" Jessica shouted, finally finding her voice. "You're all crazy! I'm not responsible for your marriage problems. You're responsible for sleeping with my husband," Patricia shot back, and the bluntness from such an elegant woman sent a shock through the crowd. That's when things got really ugly. One of the other wives stepped forward, a woman I didn't recognize but who clearly had her own grievances. "My husband mentioned you," she said to Jessica, her voice shaking with anger. "Said you were helping him with some business decisions. Now I know what kind of help you were providing." "And mine," said another wife. "All those late meetings and working dinners. I should have known." Jessica looked around at the circle of angry women and realized she wasn't dealing with one scorned wife. She was facing an entire network of women who'd compared notes and figured out her game. You don't understand, Jessica said, backing toward her car. It's not what you think. It's exactly what we think, Patricia said. You're a predator. You target successful men, seduce them, and drain them for everything they're worth. Then you move on to the next victim. The police had finished separating Brad and Dr. Garrett and were now trying to disperse the crowd, but the women weren't ready to leave. They'd waited too long for this moment. What I want to know, said one of the wives, is what your husband thinks about all this. All eyes turned to Jessica, who went white as a sheet. My husband doesn't know anything about this, she said quickly. He's not involved. Not involved? Patricia laughed. Honey, your husband is the only person here who's completely innocent. The question is, how long before he finds out what kind of woman he married? That's when I decided it was time to make my entrance. I walked across the parking lot, moving through the crowd like I belonged there, until I was standing right behind Jessica. Finds out what? I asked quietly. Jessica spun around, and the look on her face was everything I'd hoped for. Pure terror, mixed with disbelief and the dawning realization that her carefully maintained secret life had just exploded in front of the one person she'd thought was safely ignorant. Danny, she whispered, what are you doing here? I got a call, I said, looking around at the scene with false confusion. Someone said my wife was in trouble. The crowd had gone silent, sensing that the real drama was just beginning. Patricia Garrett stepped closer, clearly eager to watch Jessica squirm. Mr. Thompson, she said, extending her hand. Patricia Garrett, I believe you and I need to have a conversation about your wife. I shook her hand and nodded politely. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Garrett. I'm afraid I'm a little confused about what's going on here. Jessica was looking back and forth between us, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much Patricia was about to reveal. Your wife, Patricia said clearly, has been having affairs with multiple men, including my husband. She's been stealing money from you to fund her lifestyle, and she's been planning to leave you once she'd accumulated enough assets. I turned to look at Jessica with an expression of shocked betrayal that I'd been practicing for weeks. Is that true? I asked. Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came out. The weight of all her lies, all her deceptions, all her careful plans had crashed down on her at once. Jessica, I said again, is that true? It's not what it looks like, she finally managed. What does it look like? I asked, my voice getting harder. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife was just caught with 2 other men at a motel while a group of their wives tells me she's been running a scam on all of us. Brad chose that moment to speak up, apparently deciding that his reputation was more important than any lingering loyalty to Jessica. Look, man, I'm sorry, he said. She told me you guys were separated, getting divorced. Said you were okay with her seeing other people. Dr. Garrett nodded vigorously. Same here. She said the marriage was over, just waiting for paperwork. I looked at Jessica with the kind of cold fury that I didn't have to fake. Separated? I said. When exactly did we separate, Jessica? Was it before or after you cleaned out our savings account? Danny, please, she said, reaching for my arm. Let me explain. I pulled away from her touch like she was radioactive. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months? How you've been stealing from me to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners with other men? How you've been planning to leave me after you'd taken everything I worked for? The crowd was eating this up, phones recording every word, capturing Jessica's complete destruction for posterity. This wasn't just a private humiliation. It was a public execution of her reputation, her relationships, and her future. I never meant for this to happen, Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. It just got out of hand. Out of hand? I laughed, and there was no humor in it. You had closeness with multiple married men, stole money from your husband, and planned an elaborate escape. That's not out of hand. That's criminal. Patricia Garrett smiled with satisfaction. I think you need a good lawyer, Mr. Thompson, and I know several who specialize in these kinds of cases. Jessica looked around at the faces surrounding her, angry wives, disgusted bystanders, police officers who were clearly losing patience, and her husband who was looking at her like she was a stranger. This isn't over, she said, but her voice was weak and broken. Yes, it is, I said quietly. This is exactly over. I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. By the way, I said, the bank called. The fraud investigation is complete. Turns out there really was unauthorized access to our account. They'll be pressing charges. Jessica's face went white. You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything to you, I said. You did this to yourself. As I walked back to my truck, I could hear the crowd dispersing behind me. The police were taking statements, the wives were making plans to share information, and Jessica was sitting on the curb outside room 237, finally understanding that her foundation had completely collapsed. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long moment, looking at the house that would soon be mine alone. The methodical part of my brain was already calculating next steps: divorce papers, asset protection, changing the locks. But mostly I felt empty. Not satisfied or victorious, just empty. I'd spent months planning Jessica's destruction, and now that it was complete, there was nothing left but the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. "Holy crap, Danny. It's all over social media. Are you okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine. Justice served." Another text, this one from an unknown number. "Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Garrett. I wanted to thank you for your help today. If you need anything during your divorce proceedings, please let me know." I smiled at that. Patricia Garrett understood that revenge was a dish best served with witnesses and documentation. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it well. As I sat there, another car pulled into the driveway across the street. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, got out and waved at me. She'd probably seen the whole drama unfold on social media by now. News traveled fast in our neighborhood. "Everything all right, Danny?" she called. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson," I called back. "Just some construction work that needed to be done." She nodded knowingly. Mrs. Patterson had been married for 50 years and had seen enough to recognize a cheating spouse from a mile away. She'd probably been waiting for this day as eagerly as I had been. "Well," she said, "sometimes you have to tear down the old structure before you can build something better." "Exactly," I agreed. As the sun set over our quiet suburban street, I thought about foundations and the importance of building on solid ground. Jessica had tried to construct her new life on lies, deception, and other people's money. She'd ignored every principle of sound construction, and her whole world had collapsed as a result. But I'd built my revenge carefully, methodically, with attention to detail and respect for the weight-bearing capacity of truth. Every piece had been precisely placed, every connection tested, every weak point reinforced, construction complete, demolition successful.